recording. So the first word on this video is recording. And are we getting sound? We appear to be getting sound. I'm hopeful. Have all of the other videos been working okay for the most part? Well, if you had issues. Has anybody watched any of the other videos? Let's try it.
I couldn't find one. I typed in your Greg Marlowe learning, and it doesn't pop up.
Did you check the band page? I've been posting them there at the end of.
I never got it. I was never able to join that.
All right. So we got some catching up to do on a few things then. So we need to make sure everybody's in the band page because I'm going to post an assignment on that page today. So let me show you where a whole bunch of stuff is. If you haven't gotten on the band page, take one more stab at that using the link up on the network. But this is where I've been posting everything. And right here is where I posted last class. You should be able to click on it and watch the entire class. I'm recording as I'm recording it right now. So I'll be uploading today's on there as well. But this will help you if you missed a day of class. You can pretty much still watch the entire thing. If you were here in class and still feel like you missed a whole bunch of stuff or just didn't, like you just need a refresher, you can go back and watch it. And unlike in real life, you can watch that video on 1.5 speed. I'm sure you wish you could put me on fast forward at times when I start to drag on and on. So this is the entire class. I'll do this most days when I'm lecturing. And today's really one of the last days I'll be lecturing on this project. On the band page, I have also posted today, I just now posted this, a walkthrough playlist. And this is a series of videos I made for this entire project, not in class, right? So I recorded those from my office. They're a little bit more precise and short, so you can go through those a little faster. But I don't go in depth as much as I do in class, so that's another way you can watch through those. If you click on that link, it'll take you to a full playlist. This is me doing the entire first project. So I should answer almost every question you could possibly have for this project, either between that or that other 6 hours of video that I've recorded of us being in classes. I would be surprised the questions you might have, but that's cool. That's my hope, is to give you enough information that you can always find the answer to your own question, because you can't pack me up in a little box and take me to your job with you, right? Like eventually you're going to have to find ways of finding the answers to your questions. And I'm giving you plenty of resources to be able to do that. So, we can, yes. So, to get onto the band page, if you're not already in this page, you have to sign up for a band account first. I know a few people had some issues with that, but you have to create a profile, or you have to create an account in there. And then after you do, up on the ETSU E3 server, under the Greg folder, POA, docs, there's this link right here, POA band invite. Okay? And that's basically the direct link to that page. And if you go there, it'll ask if you want to join. You'll say yeah, and it sends me a little notification and lets me allow you in. Looks like a few people have already found that. So let me clear you for that. I thought I'd set it to automatically say yes to anybody who had the link, but oh, wait, I'm wrong. Okay. So this is convenient for people who want to ask questions or have issues, whatever may come up in this process. Okay, I just said yes to Keon, so you're in there now. So any yes.
So D2L 1900 digital media is not showing.
D2L? Okay, I haven't logged on to D2L yet either. What are you looking for on D2L?
The link.
Okay, that's in the ETSU E3 server.
E3? Okay.
Yeah, the one when you go here / /
That would explain why I can't find it.
ETSU E3. There we go, and that should take you up there. I'm under faculty, Greg, POA, and then docs is where you're gonna find that. Okay, so that'll get you to these files. This is also where you usually drop your files. So that brings us to that question. Exercise 2 is due today. Let's look at what exercise 2 looks like. I'm just going to choose somebody's project. So last class period, the bridge was due, which was basically your Maya file for you constructing the bridge. But then last class period, we also learned how to do some renders. So I'm expecting that everybody has a couple of JPEG images in here, or a single JPEG image showing their cars, right?
Not yet.
Okay, so let's just get that in by the end of class. I know we're still kind of getting into the groove of this, and this project or this exercise 2 and exercise 1 are just pass-fail projects. If you have the file in there that meets the requirements, I'm not going to like judge how good of a car it is or how nice of a car it is. More than anything, I wanted you to go through the exercise for that. Okay? And so you'll get full credit on the exercise. I'm curious now. I want to look at some of these cars. So you'll see people did some variety. They just had fun, right? And that's what you should do too, because this is, again, it's a pass-fail project. Just have some fun with them, right? Yes.
I built motorcycles that count.
Motorcycle counts. That's any mechanical conveyance. If you try a horse, all right, go for a horse. But recognize we have to make these things move later. A horse is probably going to be a little more difficult than a car because we're just going to sort of slide a car across the bridge.
Or a horse-shaped car.
A horse-shaped. How about a horse that has those little wheels on its legs?
Yeah,
I think that would probably be the way to go. Yes. Horse and buggy. Yes.
Just,
Hey man, it's got a total of at least 4 horsepower.
Oh yeah! Oh yeah! He did it. He did it. I went to a visiting tattoo. It's chest down, you know. Just look at my face. That's all you always have to say. That's what you get. Go tell Justin that thinks that it's really cheap.
what is that? The guy said he'd redo it. Like, they didn't do over it. I lived it. It's called this one, Pearl Tattoo.
Really?
In Asheville. They have like a whole three.
And some of it sometimes is just having you look over your
But
shoulder.
I almost looked at the radio and didn't look at the actual. I have a wish. It was like a
Okay.
bunch of. I have a bunch of ones. That's normally.
Okay. Are you wanting to render normal?
Yeah, it's not. That's not.
Lights. And then
I mean,
area lights.
look at it.
It's there. Definitely.
He was doing it like this, so it like
Yeah.
You render or render view?
it straightens out. But it's just
That's not fine. You're not happy with the lighting?
so
Okay.
bad.
So that just means we have to change the light. Right? So look where the light is. It's like kind of underneath it. Just sort of maneuver that around. The line that's sticking out of it toward us here, or that's the direction. So it's kind of pointing away from it. So it's probably- You're welcome. Okay. So I'll give you all a little while to go ahead and be uploading those, and I'm going to talk it. Yes.
I need permissions in the admin to look at names.
I just cleared 2 people, but let's try one more time.
Why is it so far away? Do you need them in another format than MB?
Huh?
Do you need them in a different format than MB?
So if you turn in the MBs right now, that's fine too. But what I was hoping you'd do is turn in a JPEG or a PNG of a render. So remember how we rendered in the last class period And I can help you with that as we get closer to the end of class if you have questions. So, all right, awesome.
Now I just need to know how to change from 2017 to 2018.
So this is an issue that we're going to have in this classroom primarily. For some reason, some of these computers have the wrong version of Maya on it. They have Maya 2017. That's a little bit of an issue because Maya is not backwards compatible. So I'm going to show you in this video how to do it, but the best method is to try to, this kind of sucks for anybody setting at a 2017 computer right now, is to try to go the other direction. If you worked in Maya 2017, you can open it in 2018, but going the other way can be kind of problematic. You can sometimes do it. Let me show you how that process works. So when you have Maya open, just go ahead and create a file here, create an object. If I go File, Save Scene As, I'm just going to save this file on my desktop just to show you. 2018 file. All right. If I save that .mb, if I save this as a .mb file, then what I get is this file right here. So MB stands for Maya binary, and that means that it's written in a type of, like if we were to open this up in like a document editor or notepad or something like that, it's written in non-English languages, right? It's just a bunch of symbols, right? They're not going to mean anything to us, right? And we could try that. Like if I right click on this file and say, it's not even going to give me an option. It's open with, right? And choose some more apps. None of those are the ones I want. Here, Notepad. So I'm going to open it with Notepad. Okay. And you'll see this is what that file looks like. Occasionally there's some English words in there, but like, I don't even, like that's an up arrow, 0W at, like none of that makes sense, right? So let's go back into Maya and we'll realize that when we're saving this file, save scene as, we have the option to save this as a Maya ASCII file. And so if we save it as a Maya ASCII file, it's still saving the same information. It just saves it kind of in a different language, right? So if I open this with Notepad, it's still seeming like there's a lot of non-English stuff or non-language stuff in here. But what you'll see right here is a couple of different times it says Maya ASCII 2018 scene, right? Or over here, requires Maya 2018. Well, this is just a text document. I can change that to 2017 and save that, and it will allow us to open it in 2017. So to be able to go backwards, it means you have to save it from Maya 2018 as an ASCII file. Okay? Change it in all of the locations that you see that is necessary. But this should, so if you go to View or Format Word Wrap, you'll find a couple of others right there, version 2018 and Maya 2018. All these times where it's in quotations, you'll need to change that from 2018 to 2017. And that should, in most cases, allow you to open it up in an older version of Maya. Ideally, I would try to use the version, if you're going to install Maya at home, try to use the version that we mainly have here, which is 2018. I've already told Vincent, he's the guy who sort of maintains the labs and like gets the versions of the software on there. I've already told him about all of the computers I can find, or all the computers I have found that have 2017 on them. And hopefully he'll be updating those soon. I know there's one computer that's still not working. So there's still some bugs to get out of the lab, but hopefully within the next few weeks everything will get kind of ironed out and we'll have fully functional labs with the right versions of all the software in there. So this is sort of our temporary workaround if you have to do that. And it's a little annoying in class if you worked on 2018 and you're currently setting on a 2017 computer. Sort of peck on your neighbor's shoulder and say, "Hey, can I convert this file really quick?" And then you can move it over to your computer. Okay. Again, I just recorded that on this video, so you can always go back and see how to do that later. Excuse me. Now, don't save. So, I'm going to take a minute and go ahead and get my previous save file up where we had modeled a car in class. So you all should have, hopefully, 3 different examples of a car on your, on a hard drive or in some way that you can open that up today. So go ahead and get one of those open as well, and let's kind of look at the last few things that we can do before we animate this. And then at the end of class, I'm going to give you the write-up for the full project, for project 1, and pretty much give you a couple of days just to run with this and have fun. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my scene. I'm going to go ahead and set my project, and I'm going to put it on my documents folder, bridge, set my project there. Sometimes it still won't update in here to your project file. So if we click this workspace root, it'll take us to all of our files. And I can go to scenes. And the one that I had open the other day was right here, car. All right. Okay, so this is my car. No, it's not the most impressive car out there. And I'm actually really excited just looking at some of the stuff, walking around, looking at some of your cars, vehicles. I think you've all kind of pushed this and had some fun with it, right? So let's talk again just briefly about lighting, right? If I click on my outliner, you'll see that I only have one light in my scene. It's this area light, right? And I kind of had that hidden underneath my, is it under there? Oh, yeah. So I didn't. It's in the bridge there, or it's just out in the open. And so that's how I'm getting most of my lighting. If I go to Arnold render view, hit this little play button, we get this. Now, how we rendered the other day was I clicked this little clapboard. Y'all remember that? And it rendered this same image, right? I want to go ahead and turn up that light a little bit. Maybe just bring it a little closer just so I can see the car a little better. Now, what I just did was a different way of rendering, right? I went to Arnold render view. Now this looks very similar, right? I can still see a render of my car, right? But I want to show you why I'm using this. And this is just for Arnold, right? Is because sometimes I want to make changes to my scene, to my lighting, to my materials, and I want to see what those changes are doing, right? And it's kind of annoying to make a change and then go back up there and hit render and wait for it to render and see if that was right. And if it's not right, then I have to go back and tweak that change and keep doing that back and forth over and over and over again, right? Well, Arnold Render View has this little bitty play button up here. You see that? And so if I hit that play button, it's going to render my scene, right? But watch what happens when I start manipulating things inside of the viewport. Like if I start tumbling around, it's going to update in real time, right? It's going to allow me to push in. It's going to allow me to see different things, right? And if I were to select that light that we had there, right, and go to my my attribute editor, right, and start changing the, let's say start changing the exposure. I start turning the exposure up. You'll see that I get to see the results of that in real time. So if you're curious about how I got to that again, it's under the Arnold tab, Arnold Render View. And if you don't have the Arnold tab here, you have to go to Windows. We talked about this last class period. Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and make sure that all the way down here at the bottom, m2a.mll, make sure that's checked. So Arnold Render View, And as long as we hit this little play button, it will start updating in real time, and we can make some interesting changes, right? So a couple of examples of changes I can make. In our light settings over here, I can change the color of my light. If I wanted my light to be red, so it looks like my car changed to red, but really the light that's shining on the car changed to red. You can see what happens when I grab this light and move it closer, it gets brighter. Right? You can see what happens when I scale it. Right? But it's very rare anywhere in the world that we only have one source of light. Right? Even if that source of light is the sun, that's still not really the only source of light we have, because that sun is like bouncing light off of everything, right? So what I'm going to do is just like for an interior, like in this scene here, or in this room here, we have a source of light over here, we have a source of light over here. We also have some sources of light in the back, right? And so all of those different lights are influencing just coming into the windows. So all of those sources of light are kind of influencing how the lighting works in this room. So I'm going to go ahead and add another light. Right? I could create a light. If I'm rendering in Arnold, I always go to Arnold lights, and I usually use the area light. In fact, the two lights I use the most, if not almost exclusively, is either the area light or the sky dome light. Sky dome light's interesting. If I create it, what you'll see is it creates this giant sphere around my scene, and that sphere is casting light. Okay, so this is, in video games, they would call this a sky dome, right, or a skybox. So I'm not really going to use that right now. I'm going to go ahead and go to Arnold lights and create another area light. Okay, so I'm going to move this around a little bit and start playing around with having two different light sources. Right? So I could have one light source that is coming from the front, right? Doing some interesting stuff, while the other one's coming from the top. And we can start doing stuff with light color as well. Okay? So over here in our settings, there's this use color temperature, and you'll see that if I click that, it kind of gives a little bit of like color to our light. If I go back and forth, it's not a huge difference, but it's adding just a little bit of orange. I can change what my color temperature is here. If I want to make it more warm, I can move that towards screen left. And then if I want to make my other light, if I want to use temperature on it as well, I can select it, use color temperature. I can move it in the other direction, and we can have like some blue light coming from above and some red light coming from below, right? So all that's neat. This, more than anything, I just wanted to show you that this will update in real time, right? However, no matter what lights we put in there, for the most part, we're all sitting there staring at that same green car, right? And not all cars are that ugly green color. So we have to, we can start playing around with how our actual car renders, like what is the material that is on that car, okay? So let's talk about that. I'm going to go ahead and close down my render view right here. I'm gonna go over here and select my car just so we can see it, right? And so again, if you're in the channel box, I want you to go to the attribute editor. And so again, there's these tabs along the side here, but if I click on this attribute editor tab, you'll see that I can see a lot more information about it, and all these little boxes drop down, right? And across the top is a bunch of tabs, right? Now, every time you did something to your car when you were making it, you inserted an edge loop or you extruded a face or something like that, it created an extra tab, okay? Those tabs are nodes. Like they're the way Maya does everything for the most part in terms of creation. And so if you extruded something, it added an extrude node, and there were some settings on that extrude node. And the more and more we do to an object, Maya remembers all of that, right? And so we can kind of click through those tabs with this arrow at the top. So if I start clicking, you'll see a whole bunch of different things I did there, extrude and all that. But if I get all the way over here to the end, you'll see a tab that says Lambert 1. Lambert 1. Okay? So, or actually, to be honest, it's pronounced Lambert because it's a French person who discovered this this fact of physics. So Lambert is a
French physicist.
he is, but in Maya it is a material, and all the material is something that explains to the render engine how to make this object interact with light. Okay, so our materials are things that we can change to change how our car renders, right? Do we want this to look shiny? Do we want this to look like really rough and like metallic? Do we want to put an image of some brick on it? So that's what our material is. You'll also hear materials referred to as shaders. Both are true. Not all materials are shaders. But, well, let me rephrase that. Yes, not all materials are shaders, but shaders are materials. So, so right now, everything in our scene is sharing this same Lambert 1, right? We can see a list of all of our materials by going to this little sphere up here in the top corner, this little blue sphere next to the clapboards. And if I click on that, it's going to open up all of our materials. Right? This little blue dot right here. It's like a blue dot with a, yeah, it's like a, yeah, blue eyeball. And so it's going to open it up. And this is all of the materials that are in our scene, right? So don't really worry about the particle cloud and the shader glow. Like, we very rarely interact with those. But all Maya files have a Lambert 1 shader in there. Like, just by default, you would not be able to see any of your models without some form of shader. And so Maya creates one by default and puts it on everything. And it's always the Lambert 1. In fact, I'm not even for sure you can delete that. Like, I think that it has to stay in there forever. However, we can make more shaders. So I do want you to notice that the Lambert shader is its own object. It's an object that stands alone, and it has been applied to all of these different objects that are in our scene. So it's on the bridge, it's on the car, it's on the car's wheels, right? And so what I would like to do is just create a new material and assign that to the car. So I'm going to show you one of the easier ways to do that. If you select the car, right, just the car, I'm just going to do the car body right now, and I right click and I say assign new material, it's going to pop up this giant list of stuff, right? All of these are materials, right? Not all of them are useful to you. So let's talk about some of the basics. Traditionally, Maya had the Lambert shader, the blend shader, and the Fong shader. And those are fine if we're going to be rendering in Maya software or some other type of renderer, right? Those will render in almost anything. But right now, I'm planning on rendering in Arnold, so I'm going to show you the Arnold shader. So Arnold has its own shader that just works with Arnold, but it works really, really, really well, right? So let's click on, under this Arnold tab, under shaders, it's this AI standard surface. Okay? And when I click on that, it's just going to apply that AI standard surface shader to my entire car, right? Now let's look at what that renders like. If I go to Arnold render view, go ahead and render that, right? So I feel like I need more light in here. This isn't bright enough. Actually, let me do this. I'm going to go ahead and add one of those sky dome lights. That's way too much, but I'm going to go ahead and pull down that color to something generic, right? And then I'll turn up my intensity on some of these things so we can see that a little bit better. And there we go. So you're getting to see now what this shader looks like. And so differently than the Lambert shader, we now have highlights on here. We can actually see like reflections, like these white specular lights. And what that is I mean, it's like highlights from anything glossy that you would ever see, right? Highlights are also kind of, in a way, a reflection, right? So if your highlight is glossy enough, it's like a mirror. You can see actual imagery in that highlight, right? So let's look at this and look at the things that we can change on it. So if I select my car, yes.
What shader was that?
I use the AI standard surface. So if we right click, assign new material under shaders, it's this one right here, AI standard surface. So again, if I select my car and I click out through here until I get to that AI standard surface, you'll see that that's now replaced my Lambert 1. Lambert 1 still exists. It's what's rendering on my wheels, right? But I can click on that and we can see that we have a lot of options in here. And this is why this render view is really nice, is because I can change the color, right? I can click in here and let's make it a blue car instead, right? I can adjust this in real time and I can start to see the results of what these changes are doing, right? We have a slider here that's called metalness. That sounds like that shouldn't be a real word, but it's how much of a metallic property does this have? Yes?
How do you get to that menu?
This menu? So it's the attribute editor. So if yours still looks like this, it's this tab down here. If this tab isn't visible, click this box up here. There's these 5 boxes on the top. It's the middle one. And then once you have to select your car and then go all the way out to the end with these little arrows on the top. So yeah, yours may be like here, and you'll see like this split poly ring 1. Just click all the way out. The material is usually the last thing that's on the list. The other way we can find that material is that, like I was talking earlier with this blue sphere up here, if we open that up, you'll see that now we have this AI standard material here, and we can select it from in here too, and change the properties in here. So there's a couple of different ways we can get to it. So if I crank up this metalness, you'll start to see it turns a little bit different. Like metal, just as a physical object, reacts to light a little differently than other types of objects do. There's something else, a couple of other tabs down here, and these are really interesting on what they do. So specular is the highlight and the reflection, right? So if I don't want my highlight to be quite so sharp, like right now, this is kind of like a glass orb or something like that, right? It's like it's really smooth, right? But not everything has a smooth highlight. If you look at the backs of your monitors, or the back of my monitor, it has a highlight. It's just really soft, right? It's like really blurry almost. And so that's what this roughness is, right? When something is really, really smooth, the highlight is super sharp. But the rougher it is, sort of the softer that highlight gets, right? And so we can adjust stuff in there to get a different highlight entirely, right? We also have this index of refraction. This is kind of like how reflective our object is. We can play around with that. Anisotropy is interesting. It's like, you know, when you pick up like an aluminum can, the aluminum can has a highlight that goes up and down the can. Some of that has to do with how the material has been actually fabricated in the real world, like how all of the molecules are turned. And that property is its anisotropic property. So we can make these highlights a little more like traveling along the ridge of the car, right? So we can make that kind of loop around that edge there. And interestingly, we can kind of rotate that as well. You're not really seeing a great or a huge result in that, but you can kind of give it a specific direction to that highlight. Now, I'm going to scroll down here a little bit more because some of these other tabs are turned off. If I turn on transmission, you'll see it's set to 0. And if I turn transmission all the way up, my car kind of disappears, right? Transmission is like, is kind of like translucence or transparency. It's not really transparency. It's more like how light passes through the object. And if you turn that all the way up, it can pass all the way through the object. So we can make this a lot more like a piece of glass than a solid object. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn that back down. There's another tab here called subsurface. Subsurface means that a lot of objects absorb light. Your skin is one of them, and the way you can tell that is if you kind of hold your skin up to the light. This doesn't have a lot of light coming through it. You'll see it a lot more when you're walking home. Sort of hold your hand up to the sky, and you'll see around the edges of your skin. What's happening is the light is penetrating into the skin, sort of bouncing around, and then sort of coming back out. Right. It's not translucent, you can't see through your skin, but it is absorbing light and letting that light pass through it, right? And so the light that comes back out of your skin is kind of reddish because we're filled full of red stuff, right? Like we all have like blood and organs and whatever inside of us. And so it's pulling some of that color from inside of that object and passing it out. So subsurface is kind of the same thing. If I turn this subsurface up, it'll look like it's turning the car white. But that's just because my subsurface color is white. And so if I change this to purple and played around a little bit with the weight and maybe even the scale of this, you'll start to see that it's almost more like jelly now, right? Like the car's, you can't see it quite as good up on the screen as you can on mine, but if you're playing around with it on yours, you can see something similar. And so we can get kind of this like this ability for the light to travel inside of the object, pick up a color, and kind of come out, right? So all of these different things, we have a couple of other things in here, including emission. This is like how you make your objects glow. So if I go to emission and turn this all the way up, I can make my object glow of any color, right? This will actually cast light. You'll see by turning this up, it's casting some light on my wheels here. And I can make this car glow sort of this bright blue, and it would pretty much be a blue light in our scene now, right? One of the last things I'll show you in Arnold Render View is if I click on this car, even though this is just an image, just a render, it'll let me select that object. So if you accidentally deselect something, you can click in here and select it through the render view as well. And so I'm going to go back here and turn my emission back down. So there's a whole bunch of different things we can do with our materials. One of the last things I'll show you is that there's some presets on these materials. They're a good starting point. They're rarely your end point. But if I go to presets here, click on that, you'll see all these different options for presets. So if I wanted this to look like this car was made of orange juice, now we got an orange juice car that drives around, right? Or if I wanted to make it look like car paint, that wouldn't make sense, right? Let's try car paint metallic. Right? So now it's got that little metal fleck in it that that cars have, or that some cars have, right? And so we can get some really neat looking materials out of this thing, right? And hopefully you're noticing that these renders look good, right? There's no other renderer in Maya, as it is installed on these machines, that will render this nicely. So a lot of certain portions of the project are to focus on the final aesthetic, like the final way this image looks. And so for that reason, I would strongly, strongly encourage you render it using Arnold. The last thing I'll really show you in Arnold is if you notice down here, after we made all those changes, now it's taking 12 seconds to render a frame of animation. Okay? How many frames is in a second of animation? 24, as it's Maya's default is set for 24. 24 is usually for film, right? There are 24 images that flash in a second of film, right? Video is 29.97, and video games are usually 30 to 60 depending on the game. 30 is kind of the older standard, 60 is, but 30 is the bare minimum you'll ever see it, right? Yeah, it's like, yeah, they just keep cranking that number up. The funny thing is your eyes have a refresh rate of about 30 refreshes a second. So like some of that, like you definitely see smoother motion, but like I don't necessarily, I don't know. That's a long discussion. Um, Interestingly though, like that number isn't always the same for everything, right? If you're doing VR, right, like virtual reality, that's showing an entire video to each of your eyes. So that means your refresh rate is 120 frames a second, because it has to do 60 frames per second for this eye and 60 frames per second for this eye. So all of these things have different numbers. Right now, by default, Maya's going to use 24. Okay, and we talk about that because we're going to do some animation, and I like how this looks, and I would like to see 24 of these a second, not 24 of these, right? That's not that great. Like that's, yeah, we got a little highlight on there, whatever. But Maya or Arnold's renderer is just going to make a prettier image for us. It's going to make a prettier 24 images for a second of animation. So we have this. You can spend a little time sort of playing around with getting your cars to look the way you want them to look. This is not necessarily the advised way to do materials, but you can assign a new material to specific faces as well. Later, you'll learn that that's probably not the best way. Like you'll want to you don't want to have to assign a new material to every face of your object if you want a really complicated material, right? But if I go in here and choose face, I can select this face, right? And right click and assign a new material just to that face. Right? And so that'll allow me to change some stuff up too. Again, not the best way of doing it, but for right now, if you're wanting to mess around with it, that's probably going to be the easier way of doing it. Now this is really kind of going out there into something that's more complicated. But I want to show you one more thing inside of your materials, because you'll notice that down the side of almost all of these values is a little checkerboard. See this little checkerboard out here on the end of each of those things? Let me show you what that does, right? So if I had, I'm just going to make a sphere here just so we can see this is an example. All right, get something new. I'm going to assign a new material to this. I'll go ahead and do that AI standard surface. All right. So right now I can change this color to a single flat color. Right, I can change it to purple. And that means every inch of this object is that same color of purple. That's very rare in the world, right? Like every inch of this table is not the same color of brown, right? It's got variations in there. It's got patterns in there. And so that means a lot of times for the color of an object, we need to be able to apply an image to it, right? So that's what this little checkerboard is for. This allows us to map something in to our color channel. Okay? So if I click on this, you'll see some of the things that I can map in. I can map in some procedural things like a checkerboard. So if I click on checker, it looks like nothing happened. It looks like it turned it white instead of a checkerboard, right? So that's where we go back to our shortcut keys and remember that 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, and 6 is textured. Okay? Now, I chose the checkerboard, but we can actually choose any image in the world that you want to use if you own that image, right? Googling like random images off of the internet is theft. Like you're going to eventually make art. You don't want people to just Google an image, grab it, and throw it into their art and say, hey, I made that, right? So there are certain places where we can get textures without having to infringe upon anyone else's copyright. So if you want a texture to apply to something, just search textures. And usually it's going to bring up textures.com, right? You can sign up for a free account at textures.com. And all of these are free to use for student use, right? So there's a lot of good like brick materials. There's a lot of good all sorts of different stuff in here, right? There's also another very tricky way to get textures. It's called do it yourself, right? Like go outside and take a picture of the thing you want a texture of. If you want a wood pattern like the wood pattern that's on this table, take a picture of this table, right? That's one of the reasons we teach you all how to do Photoshop, is that you can take that now and you can turn that into all sorts of stuff. Sometimes you want a texture of something you can't actually get a picture of, like a Martian, not Martian, like some far off galaxy, some strange planet, the formation of like patterns in like an alien skin or something like that. Well, I mean, take a picture of this carpet and run some filters on it and do some digital painting on it and make something like that is sort of your own. So once we have an image that we can use, actually let me go ahead and log in and download one here to show you. So I'm going to log in. Thanks for remembering me. Let's try Rust. Rust is nice. I'm going to grab some of this scratched rust. All right, maybe go ahead and grab, some of these are going to be tiled. So if you click on this one, you'll see that there's some options for this, like these tiled versions. They say seamless. And those are pretty nice because they let you repeat them without really noticing it. So I'm going to go ahead and download this 1024 by 1024. And I'm going to put that, and this is very important, I'm going to put that underneath my bridge folder. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put mine under source images. So if I put it in source images, and, oh, I already had some, and hit save, right? Textures.com Rust. Now when I go in here and map in something to my color, I want to get rid of this checkerboard, so I'll right click on color, say break connections. Right? But now if I go in here to color and click on that, I can choose a file instead. You'll see file is one of my options. So I click on that, I click here, and Rust texture, it's not the one I wanted to use, it's that one there, right? And hit open, and you'll see now it's going to apply that rust texture to my sphere. Right. So this is how we can get your bridge to be made out of concrete. This is how we can get your wheels to be made out of, I like to say Goodyear around them or whatever. Now, there's a step in this that is very complicated, and we're not going to go over in this project. We'll go over it in future projects. But that's how to make that texture wrap around your car the correct way, right? Like if you were making, I don't know, it's what was it the Firebird that had the like decal of the bird on the hood, right? To get that to line up correctly, Maya's not just going to know where to put that, right? You have to tell it how to line that up, and that process is called UV unwrapping. Like just for sanity's sake, we're going to skip over that for right now. We'll talk more about that in future projects. I can help you out individually if there's something specific you're trying to achieve, but I don't want to use much more lecture time on this. So the last thing I'll say on this, every one of these channels have that little checkerboard next to them, okay? So think about what that means. I map this into color, and now that means my color of this object is rust, right? But what if I mapped that into, let's try roughness, like of our specularity. What would that do? Any ideas? Anyone awake? Okay. So an image is just a bunch of numbers, right? Based off of color. So our color spectrum, if this were a black and white image, we could say, black is no light and white is 1, like complete light, right? And so we could use that number from 0 to 1 to drive the values of these channels, right? So our specular weight right now is 1. And if I had a gradient that went from completely white to completely black, we could say that parts of our image are completely bright, and other parts of our image or other parts of our textures are completely dark, right? And so we could use that to drive and make certain parts of our object shiny while other parts of our object are not shiny. Okay? We'll get into that more later. Don't sweat it right now. But if this is something you're interested in, keep playing with it. Like there's some cool stuff that you can do with this. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and delete this sphere though. All right, so on to animation. I'm gonna go ahead and give my wheels some basic materials, just so I don't have to worry about this later. Shader, surface, and I'll go ahead and turn that down to almost completely black. Something you'll recognize is that very few things, very few colors in the world are completely black, because that usually, like that's like closing your eyes in the dark, right? That means there's no light really hitting that at all. So even like the backs of your monitors are really just a kind of a dark gray, right? Extremely dark gray. So that's why I made the wheels this color. And so what I'm going to get now when I render this, go ahead and turn down my specular too. When I render this, I'm going to get something like this, right? I'm completely happy with that for this project. This is where I'm aiming, right? Now I want to start animating this object, right? But to do that, I need to move the entire object together. Okay? And so most of you probably think you have a good idea of how to do that, right? We can grab our objects, all of our objects together, right? And we can move them around. Like, look, they all go together, right? But let's say I needed to animate my car turning, right? If I rotate them all together, we get this, right? Which is not very useful, right? So that's where we're going to introduce a new word, a word that you've probably heard me say. It's called rigging, R-I-G-G-I-N-G, right? And think of that as any type of, like if you talk about a stage play, all of the like wires and supports and everything above the stage that are holding the lights up, that are holding, Peter Pan as he goes sailing across the stage, all of that is rigging, right? That's sort of the setup or the supporting system of it, right? And so how I want you to think of rigging in Maya is preparation for animation, okay? I know I want to animate this car, right? My only problem is like I don't want to animate every piece of this car separately and try to always keep them together, right? That would just be ridiculously complicated for some objects. Think of the Transformers, the terrible Michael Bay movies, like all of those different interacting parts, right? Like imagine animating every one of those individually and trying to keep them all together in some cohesive shape that looks like a transformer, right? That's not really possible. So what we're going to do is sort of organize our characters so they move together in a very functional way, right? So again, I'm just going to sort of step off to the side and talk about rigging, and then we'll come back and apply it to this vehicle, right? So if I go ahead and create a sphere, right? I'm going to move this off to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this sphere a couple of times. What's the shortcut key to duplicate?
Control D.
Control D, right? Some people will do Control C, Control V. Let me show you why that's a bad idea. It will work. Control C copies it. Control V pastes it. Wait, did I even do that right? I don't know what that was. Control C copies it. Control V should paste it. What it apparently does is put it in a group and then calls that group pasted sphere 1, right? That's not necessarily what I want. If I just select this sphere and hit Control D, it just gives me a duplicate of it that's just like it and names it something sensible. So as much as you use Control C and Control V and everything else, don't use it in here in Maya. It will just make your scene a mess, right? Okay. So here is sort of the basics of rigging, okay? You're actually probably already familiar with this concept of what we're going to do here because you've all organized stuff into a folder, right? Let's think of your classes right now, right? You have a bunch of folders on your jump drive, right? Thumb drive, and you're organizing all the files for that to keep it in some reasonable structure, right? So let's say you have one class that's a history class and one class that's an English class, right? And then this is spring of 2018, right? So maybe on your jump drive you have a spring of 2018 folder, right? And then you have a folder inside of that that has history 101 or history 1800 or whatever, and English 1220 or some whatever. I don't know any of the numbers, right? And you have each of those inside of that folder. Now, if you grab that entire spring 2018 folder and moved it somewhere else, right? Like moved it to another jump drive, all of those folders that are underneath it will go with it, right? Both of your class folders will go with it. And that means any papers you wrote for English that were inside of there, they'll all go with it too, right? It's like a container that you can move around that moves all of those subfolders with it, right? But if you were to just grab your English folder and move it, what would happen to your history folder? Nothing, right? Because you didn't manipulate it, right? It's in its own hierarchy or its own chain, right? So the word hierarchy is something you're going to hear used quite a bit. Hierarchy just means chain of command or chain of order, right? We hear the word hierarchy used in terms of like of royalty, right? The queen is higher than the prince, and the prince is higher than a duke, and blah blah blah, right? All the way down the chain of command. We also can call this a parent hierarchy, a parent-child hierarchy, because in theory, a parent object should control a child object, right? Like if you go to Walmart, in theory, the parent holding the kid's hand is like, no, we're going to cosmetics, follow me, and the child has to go with it, right? With the parent, right? That's in real life, the kid's probably dragging the parent everywhere or whatever, but that's what we're looking at here, right? And so I made these three spheres. Let's give them quick names so we understand what they are. I'll call this one big. I'll call this one mid. And I'll call this one small, right? And so if I move the big object here, nothing happens to the other two, right? Because they're kind of all off to their own, right? And if I move the mid, nothing happens to the other one, right? Now, if I were to move the mid underneath the big, right? Let me show you how to do that. If I middle click on mid and drag that on top of big, now you'll see that it's like parented underneath it. It's just like if I were to drop, let me move that differently so you can see it better. It's just as if I would have dropped a file into another folder, right? It's underneath it. It's parented underneath it, right? And so now if I move big, mid goes with it, right? Now, it doesn't work the other way. If I grab mid and move it, it's not going anywhere. But then again, if I grab big again, mid's going to go with it, right? So the way I like to think of this is it's like a container for the object above it or underneath it, right? And so we can continue this chain of command. Control Z here and get that back to where it was, right? And I could drag small by middle clicking on the word small, like with a mouse wheel, and drag that on the word mid. And now I have this full command chain here, right? Where if I grab big, all of them go. If I grab mid, just mid and small go. And if I grab small, small moves by itself. Recognize that this goes with movement and rotation. If I rotate here, we get this. If I rotate here, we get this. This hierarchy is just like what's happening with our arm, right? If I rotate at my shoulder, my elbow goes with it. If I rotate at my elbow, my wrist goes with it. If I rotate at my wrist, my fingers go with them, right? It's impossible for like the last digit of my middle finger to go somewhere by itself. Well, without it hurting really bad. So this is how a hierarchy works, right? And so we're able to parent stuff together. We're able to control things, and we're able to do all of that to give us a more appropriate way to animate our objects, right? Um, I can also parent these objects under things that are not going to render or things that are not visible, right? So if I grabbed big and hit Control G, what you'll see is I parented them under something called a group. Right? And if I click on that group and hit F, you'll see that the group is over here, but I don't see anything. A group is just an invisible object. Basically, it's an object that doesn't render, has no visible attributes, right? And so I could now animate that group, and my entire sphere structure there goes with it, right? Or I could undo that, and I could create another type of object. I could create let's go to curves and surfaces. I could create a circle, right? Now, a circle doesn't render. It's just a curve. It's just a line, right? And I could put this line over here and roughly orient it like this, right? And I could parent all of that underneath, all of this underneath my NURB circle. And that means I can animate my NURB circle and move this entire thing around, right? So that's beneficial because sometimes you need the control for something to be in a different location, or just easy to pick, right? Easy to select. Okay. So that was a long way to go to explain a hierarchical structure, but hopefully that makes sense about how this parent-child relationship works, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and name the parts of my car just so I know what they are. So I'll call this car body. I'll call this front wheels and rear wheels. Right? And so now those three pieces are all part of my car. Right? So there's two different ways I could do this. Right? I could grab both of those, hold control and select both objects, and I could drag that onto car body. And if I did that, that means all I would have to do is select the car body, and now I could animate all three of these things, and they'll go with the car, right? I'm going to do this a different way, though, just to make this a little simpler. I'm going to create a controller. I'm going to create a ring, right? So I'll grab this ring, right? And so now that's where my, this is the thing that will control my car. I'll go ahead and move this over here so it's kind of in the spot that I want my car to be. So maybe something like this. I just Control Z to undo it, but you can also still middle click and drag them outside as well. So if I have that like this, I can middle click these front wheels and sort of pull them sort of above it, but not on top of another object, like in between the two. And it should take it out as well. Yes?
I can't move things in my outlier.
Okay.
It won't let me move that. That one there, that.
Okay, that's cool. Let's see if other people are having this issue. So, is anybody else having that issue where you middle click and all of your windows get really small?
I don't have windows. Wait, which windows?
Just like all of your screen just like turns into a bunch of little squares in the middle of.
I was doing that the other
I
day.
had that problem like last week.
Okay, let me show you how to fix that. My bad. I forgot that that was even an issue. Mine's not doing it, so I can't make it do it. But basically, what's happening is where I was telling people to middle click and drag these drag these objects on top of each other. Some people, when they middle click, all of your images like turn into like this little like thin row of images in your scene there, and that's called the application switcher. And for some reason, some people's have that installed on it and other people's don't. Let me show you how to fix that. In fact, some people's middle click may not be working at all. If we just go here and type mouse, you should be able to go to mouse settings, hopefully. No, do I not have mouse settings? Come on. So mine's not doing it. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to do that. Well, mine may not do it, because what's actually happening is it's a mouse driver that some people have. Control panel. Let's see if I have it over here. Mouse. Yeah. So some of you will have a thing up here in the very end of this that says something like checkpoint settings or set point settings. Does anybody have that? Anyway, it's there. And from there, you can change what your middle button does. And you want your middle button to act as a middle button instead of application switcher. Yeah, middle button. I would also say go ahead and change 6 and 7. Middle button as well, under other. Because that's really like your mouse button leaning from side to side. So if you have that issue, it's annoying. I think that that's one of the machines that has the old version of Maya on it. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah. I think that that's the reason most people aren't having that issue is I think we fixed it in the new version. So you'll probably only run into that on the old version. But yeah, that's annoying. I'm sorry. But once you change that, it should let you use that as the regular middle button. So, okay. So I have this ring now, right? And I'm going to call this my car control. Car CTRL, right? I just went to NURBS curves up here, or curves and surfaces, and just click that little circle. You could also do it by going to create, and I think it's NURBS primitives circle. Now the cool thing about this, the reason I do this is because if I render, that ring doesn't render, right? So this is something that I can have in my scene that I can see here and manipulate, but I don't have to worry about accidentally screwing something up on my model, right? So I have this car control, right? But right now if I move that around, it doesn't do anything. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to parent all of my car objects underneath that control. So I'm going to click each of these while holding control, right, select those, and then middle click drag those onto car CTRL. Now, here's the cool thing about this. If I go to my, my channel box here, I can select all of my car parts and add that to a layer, right, and lock that. And now I can't select the car anymore. I just select the control and I can animate the entire car however, wherever I want it, right? The entire car will go with it. So that means the only thing I really have to animate now is this ring, okay? And that gives me control of the entire car. So again, all I did is I just parented each of these underneath it. If for some reason I still wanted to animate the wheels, let's say I wanted to make the wheels turn, I can animate that part separately because they're still going to be going with the car wherever it goes, right? Okay. So again, this means I'm only going to animate the ring to be able to animate my car. And I keep using that word. I keep saying we're going to animate stuff. We're going to animate stuff. But so far, if I hit play, nothing moves, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save this file where it's at right now. And I'm going to show you some basics of animation, okay? And then from that, we're going to animate our car driving across the bridge. So, file, new scene. Oh, wait, no, file, increment and save, right? And again, I just like to go off to the side and sort of show you how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and create another sphere, move that over here, right? And we're going to animate this sphere, okay? So if I look at this sphere right now, it's a brand new object, and I just moved it from my origin point 50 units in translate x, right? I moved it 50 units in x away from its origin point, right? So that's where this object is right now, okay? And I changed that value just by moving it, but if I go off and do something else and come back, that object's still going to be there, right? Because I just put it there. I'm the one that's in control of this. Animation is just a marker in time on those values, okay? And the shortcut key to animate something is S, okay? So let's try this. Right now, in my scene, actually, I'm going to do this in a new scene so you can see the grid. Sorry, let me go ahead and just do File, New Scene, don't save it. It makes it easier to see the motion. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and move this to translate X 10, all right? Okay, so we know that right now my object is over here 10 units in X, right? And so I'm on frame 1, and I can drag on my timeline, but again, nothing's animated, so nothing is moving, right? So if I have my object selected and I hit S, I want you to notice what happens. Okay, there's two different things that changed when I hit S. One of them is down here in my timeline on frame 1, I got a little red line. Okay, see that? The other is over here on all my translates, rotates, and scales. All of those values turned red, right? Or at least the little box beside those values turned red. So what that means now is that that keyframe is controlling those values. And I've told Maya that anytime we're on frame 1, that's what those values should be, okay? And if we set all those values to that, it's always going to end up in that same spot. So anytime we're on frame 1, Maya's translate X should be 10, and all of those other values should be 0, except for the scale, that's 1, right? So let's go a little further in time. Let's go out to frame, let's go ahead and go to frame 120. That's where mine's at, right? And I'm going to change that translate X from 10 to negative 10, right? Now, I made that change. I'm on frame 120, right? And I changed that to negative 10. So if I scrub my timeline, I should see animation, right? But when I scrub my timeline, Maya just goes back to the original spot, right? It's because I didn't set a keyframe. Okay? I didn't tell Maya that whenever I'm on frame 120, I want you to be at negative 10. Okay? So what I'm going to do is select that and hit S. And you'll see now I have a keyframe here and a keyframe here. And if I hit play, Maya's going to animate between those two locations. Okay? Maya's going to figure out all of that stuff that happened in between. Now, yours may be playing super fast, or it may be playing at this speed, or maybe it's playing at a completely different speed. The important thing to recognize is that when it's all said and done, your animation is 24 frames per second. Maya can play it at 5,000 frames a second, and here, it doesn't matter. When you render, what you're going to need to see is 24 frames in a second, right? So to see what your animation speed actually looks like, you need to right-click on your timeline, right here, and under playback speed, make sure that's set to real time, okay? If it's set to play every frame, it may play back way faster or way slower. See, that's what it looks like set to play every frame, right? And so you can see the problems we would have. That set to play every frame means Maya is just going to play it as fast as it can, right? And that's going to vary depending on how fast your computer is, right? Your computer at home may be slower or older or whatever, and that means it's going to play this back super slow, right? What we want to see is the actual speed of that animation. So right-click, playback speed, real time, right? And so this is the real-time animation of this, right? 24 frames a second. we have this object traveling that distance in 120 frames. You all got into this major because you hate math. But we could probably do some simple math and realize that that's 5 seconds, right? It's traveling from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen in 120 images or 5 seconds, right? Now, the important thing to notice is that the number of frames, we can change how fast this object moves just by making that distance that it travels happen in fewer frames, right? So if I wanted to hit stop here, I'm going to delete this keyframe. I can do that just by clicking on that frame, right-clicking, and say delete. And I'm going to go ahead and set that keyframe instead on frame 30. Right? I'm going to go ahead and move that over here to -10. And hit S. And so now that frame or that animation is going to happen in 30 frames. And if I hit play and watch that, that's way faster, right? So the number of frames it takes an action to happen is that animation's timing, right? And so the fewer frames, the faster the object is going to appear to be moving, right? All right. We can add more keyframes to this, though. We can add a huge number of keyframes in here. A final character animation will sometimes have thousands of keyframes on it, right? So let's look at just making this thing move around our scene, right? So let's say after I get to this side, I want it to travel upward and over here, and I want it to scale out, right? And scale down and do something like this. And I do all of this work to get this pose, and I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. And then I scrub, and I'm like, ah, crap, I keep forgetting to hit S, right? Well, there's a trick to that. If we click down here underneath our play button, you'll see a little circle. It looks like a circle of arrows. So you can see it down here underneath our little play button. That button is the auto key toggle, okay? And what that means is that anytime I make a change to one of these values, Maya's automatically going to set a keyframe, but just in the value I changed, right? So as I showed you, like when I'm on frame 30, you'll see that all of those keys are red. But when I go out here to frame 50, you'll see that they're all pink, right? Pink means that this object is animated, but there's not currently a keyframe on that frame. So I'm going to move this around, move it up, move it over. And you see that as I change those two values, they turn red and I get a keyframe there, right? But my rotate Z and Y, those don't have a keyframe yet. Okay? So I can scale this and do this, right? And adjust it. And all of that means that all of those red channels are now keyed, right? Now, for me, this is just good practice. I usually hit S anyway. I just use auto key to make sure I don't lose my pose, right? So I can do that, and then if I scrub the timeline, it will come back to this pose here, right? But I want to make sure that all of these values stay the same. All of these rotates and translate zeros stay the same. So I'll go ahead and hit S, and I can key that. And so this allows me to animate pretty quickly, right? I can rotate like this, move it down to here, hit S, right? And so now you're going to start seeing my ability to make pretty sweeping changes, drastically different things to this animation. This, scale the whole thing up. Actually, let's scale this whole thing to 17, right? And hit S. And then I want this last keyframe, though. I want it to end back there where it started, right? So one of the things I could do is manually type all these in. The other thing I could do is to sort of still this keyframe that already exists, right? So this is a little bit of a trick. If I middle click on frame 1 and drag on my timeline, you'll see that the animation doesn't update, right? Like it's not changing. And that means by the time I get out here to frame 100, even though that's not really what frame 100 looks like, my object still looks like it did on frame 1. Right? Now, if I were to just regular click and drag, you'll see it goes back to what it should look like. But middle click is basically not updating my screen. That means when I get out to frame 100, if I hit S, it will set a keyframe on frame 100 in the position that the object was on frame 1. Okay? And so now if I hit play, and it's going to do this forever. Okay? So Maya will eventually loop. So this is how animation works in Maya. Okay? We're setting keyframes on our timeline. We're defining what is happening on these keys, right? We're defining on what happens on frame 1, frame 30, frame 50, frame 60, frame 80, frame 100. Who is deciding what happens on those other keys? Like, who decides what happens on frame 15? Maya, right? Now, here's something, we'll talk about this later, but Maya is going to make boring decisions because Maya is a computer and thinks with math, right? Maya is just going to always kind of draw straight lines in between stuff. And so our job as an animator is to make Maya less boring, right? We can create these poses, but Maya is still going to come up with sort of dull solutions on how it gets from pose A to pose B, and we have to control that, okay? So we'll definitely practice that more over the next few weeks, and if you go into the animation concentration, that's the largest majority of what it is we're studying. It's how to fabricate action, right? And so that's something to think about. Is that the part that you like? We'll be doing a few exercises here in the future that will hopefully give you a chance to find out if that's what you like. Okay, so we've made some action. We've made some stuff move. I'm going to go back to my car now. So car 001, don't save, okay. I have my car. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my bridge layer, right? And so I just want to animate my car driving across this bridge, right? I'm going to do something pretty simple. So I'm going to go ahead and move my car over, sort of get it in its starting position. Right? I want to make sure that the car is actually touching the bridge. Right? So maybe something like that, right? Make sure it's on the right side of the road, the correct side of the road. So let's say this is its starting point, okay? I'm going to go ahead and hit S, right? And I'm going to go ahead and go to, say, frame 30, and I'm going to move my car to the other side of the bridge, all the way over here, hit S again, okay. And so now my car is driving way too fast. He's going to get a ticket. How do I slow him down? So I need to move this keyframe. Right now, he's on the other side of the bridge at frame 30, right? And so I could delete that keyframe and go out there and set that same keyframe on frame 70. But what I'm going to show you how to do right now is how to move that keyframe I already made, okay? So if I hold down Shift and then drag select on my timeline, you'll see I'm highlighting frames, right? And so I can pull that now from these little middle bars. There's these little middle arrows here. I can click those and drag that, and now I can retime my animation. And so now it's taking him 60 frames to get to the other side. It still feels a little fast to me. Let's go ahead and move it to 90. And so now he's driving across that bridge in about, well, let's see, 20, about 4 seconds, right? A little under 4 seconds. So this is the basics of animation. I want you to have fun with this, but really the only animation requirements is to make your car drive across, or make all three of your cars drive across this bridge in some way or another, okay? Have fun with that. If you want to make them race each other and have to like swerve so they don't wreck, if you want to crash them off the bridge, if you want to make one of them a flying saucer that comes in and steals one, whatever. I've had a large range of people, or a large range of solutions to this problem. Yes? Yeah. Oh, so to move keys. So if I hold Shift and hold down Shift and just regular click, that's going to highlight a range of keys. And you'll see a couple of things. There's 2 arrows in the middle. There's 2 on each end. I'm going to grab the ones in the middle, and that'll let me slide that key to a different point on the timeline. And then once I'm done with that, I can just sort of click off of it, and I've retimed my animation. Okay. Now, I want you to, again, I keep reiterating this. I want you to realize that what we've just done now, with the exception of rendering, which I'll cover a little bit more in some videos, and maybe some in the next class, just to kind of walk you through the rendering process, because I know nobody's ready to render. You'll forget by the time we get there. But with the exception of rendering and compiling this into a full video, we've gone through the entire animation pipeline, right? Everything we've just done, from modeling to lighting to rendering to animation to rigging, all of that stuff, those are the same steps that Pixar goes through when they're making a movie. Every animated short film you've ever done has to go through all of those steps, right? The point of this class is to take you through all of the phases of a 3D production, right? A 3D animation production. And we're going to do that 4 times, right? We have 4 projects where we pretty much go through an entire project production 4 times. What you should find out by the end of that is which parts of that do you really like and which parts of that do you really hate, right? And we will use that information that you gather from that to help you determine what it is you should do for the next 3 years after you get out of this class, right? Should you go into the animation concentration? Should you go into the game design concentration? Should you consider a different major? Like maybe, and that's not me saying anything bad about you. Maybe like the thing that you learn from this class is that you actually like traditional art better, or you actually like programming better, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like that is a great thing to learn as early as possible, right? So I want you to have fun with this. I want you to try stuff. I want you to experiment with it. I don't want you to worry as much about, at least on this first project, I don't want you to worry so much about following every exact rule as much as making something that just looks really awesome, right? Like, why are we getting into this if it's not to make something that looks really awesome? So do the thing you're excited about. If you, my wife is absolutely obsessed with old strawberry shortcake, right? I guarantee you her version of this would be strawberry shortcake and like Huckleberry Hound like racing across the bridge, and it would probably end in an explosion because that's my wife. She also so whatever it is you're excited about, like make that fun. Like make something that you want to make, right? Do you want a like, I don't know, like something sci-fi in this? Do you want to make this something adorable? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post the actual write-up for the project so you'll see what we're aiming at, right? The first 2 exercises was to kind of get you rolling on this. Really, the project is just to finish this up and make it something awesome, right? So I'm gonna post the project on Band, so you will always have a copy of that wherever you go. I think I've mentioned this before. Band comes with a pretty decent app as well, and so if you're like at Walmart and you're like, crap, is that due tomorrow? And you can open it up and look and see, right? So let's go ahead and post that first so you can actually see the official write-up for it. Where is Band? Did I close that down already? There it is, right? So give me 1 second to open this. PR1. Okay. So I just posted PR1 bridge, right? And this is the write-up. So, zoom in here so you can see it. I always like to start every project with a why. Why are we doing this, right? The purpose of this project is to allow you to explore the basic elements of the animation pipeline so you can learn the basics and start to get an idea of what part of the process you enjoy the most, okay? We're going to go through a very easy version of this. You're going to start getting an idea of maybe you like animation, maybe you like modeling more. And the next project, you'll explore modeling or whatever it is you like. You'll explore that a little bit more and decide if you're right or not. And hopefully by the time you've done that 4 times, you'll have a good idea of what it is you enjoy. So what is due? Using the 3 animated vehicles in the bridge from the first 2 exercises, create a full scene and adding in any additional models, lights, materials, textures, and animated cameras and other elements as you see fit. Like basically make this thing awesome, right? You should feel free to make this scene your own, right? So what is actually due? The finished piece would be a fully rendered 10 to 12 second animation at a resolution of 1920 by 1080. Okay, I want to kind of hold off on showing you how to render out an image sequence until next class period, just because I feel like I've just been bombarding you with information today. It's probably feeling a little overwhelming. Going into a whole other section of this process probably isn't going to make that easier for you to remember. So the other thing, when is this due? So the final rendered, so no play blast. So I don't even know if I've shown you what a play blast is yet. I'll show you in a bit. So the final rendered MP4 or MOV video will be due on Wednesday, February 7th. So a week from today is February 5th, right? That's Monday. So the following Wednesday is when the next class period after that, that Wednesday is when this is due. So we have a little bit over a week for you to go nuts on this thing and make it awesome. I would allow yourself a minimum of 24 hours to render. Okay, so that means I would plan on, when you come into class a week from today, I would plan on being as finished as you can possibly be at that point, because rendering takes a long time. I showed you earlier when we hit render, we were getting a 12 seconds a frame, right? But if I go in here, see Arnold render, hit render, we're getting this render. So that rendered pretty quick, 9 seconds, but it's also rendering a pretty small image, and it's got a lot of grain in here on the light, right? So later I'll show you how to increase some of the sampling on this. So we'll need our samples to go up to something like 5. Don't necessarily worry about what I'm doing right now. I'll explain this later. Just to give you an idea of what we're getting out of it, though. Maybe our samples on our sky dome need to be up to 10. And we're rendering really small right now. So if I go to my render settings and set this to the required size, which was 1920 by 1080, this is full HD 1080, right? And I did an Arnold rendered there, right? Hit play. Let's see how long it takes it to get the final image. Still thinking about it. Okay, 12 seconds to get an image, right? So 12 times 24, let's pull this out and do some math. Yeah, I'm going to do math in front of the class here. 12 times 24, that's 288 seconds to do a minute of animation, times 10, 2,880, divide that by 60. So it's going to take 48 minutes just to render that out in this quality, right? After you get your scenes in there, or all of your environments in there, you get a bunch of materials in there, your average render time is going to be somewhere between, I'm guessing, 45 seconds to a minute and a half a frame. It's not unheard of for renders to take 5 to 10 minutes a frame, right? And when you multiply that times 24 and then that times 10, you're going to start seeing that render times can get up to 8, 10, 12, 24 hours. Like, it's ridiculous how long these can get. And if you're really, really rendering in some awesome quality, sometimes renders take an hour a frame, right? And that sounds like I'm asking you to do something impossible. I'm not. Once we get to that level of stuff, I can show you how to use the render farm. And basically, what you would do is you would divvy out each frame onto a different computer. And so if you have 40 computers and they're taking 5 minutes a frame, then you can do 40 frames in 5 minutes, right? So I'll show you how to use the render farm. I may go ahead and dip into that next class period when we start talking about setting up our stuff for render. Some of this stuff that I'm going to go into though is in that playlist already. So watch through that playlist. Watch the video that I'm recording right now that I'll post here in a bit, and hopefully that will answer a vast majority of your questions. So, anybody have any questions right now?
Might be one afterwards.
Might be one afterwards. Yes.
My question is from last week.
It's what?
It's from last week.
From last week? Okay. Is it one that everybody might want to hear an answer to, or is it like?
Probably not.
Okay.
So basically, I made all my vehicles out of like a bunch of shapes,
Uh huh.
and I was wondering because your car is like all smooth and everything, right? And it's just like I think 3 shapes. How do I do that with mine?
I'll have to look at yours to get an idea.
I got it open here.
Yeah, cool. We'll check that out. So it's all right if yours is made up of a bunch of different pieces. Like if you were making a really high res object, sometimes like yeah, your seats inside of the car are going to be a different piece. Your windows may be different pieces. Your bumper may be a different piece. Your wheel may be made up of 3 or 4 pieces. That's where the rigging part of that comes in to make it all move together. So a lot of times people want to see examples of what this finished piece looks like from other classes. Is anybody interested in seeing that? All right. Let's check out a few of those. I'm going to pull out a range of stuff. Like it's not all going to be the best stuff. Some of it's going to be a mix. But if you're curious about browsing through some of this, up in the Greg folder under old, some of my older classes are still up here. So let's look at last class, fall 2017, POA, Dropbox. And so this is PR1, bridge scene render. Matthew Blair did pretty good. So he added some extra stuff to his. This actually isn't the finished piece because he ended up submitting a revision. Graded. And so something he was really interested in is how to get water in a scene, right? And so he did a little extra research to figure out how to do that, right? And I can show you some tricks on how to get some form of water if that's something you're specifically wanting, right? Let's look at. Did she do? Yeah, she did a revision on her breakfast scene. Oh, this is a different project. Never mind. So Dropbox, Bridge 1 render. Okay, maybe that's not the best example.
It's falling off the bridge.
Yeah. Let me find. I know there was a couple of them that came out pretty good. Let's see. So, in this one, he really wanted to explore animation a little bit more. Didn't quite do as much on the modeling and texturing. I think that what I would target is sort of a healthy mix of all of it. Try a little bit of all of it because that's how you're going to find out if you like this stuff or not. Later, he did another revision that actually turned out much better on that one. Let me try to find. Forgetting names. Here we go. So, he tried something a little bit bigger. Made a little bit more complicated cars. Did like a little bit of a scene of a race. I feel like there's a couple others that were pretty good in here. Yeah, this one's too dark. We'll pull up another one. I'm going to go back a few more class periods and show you some examples from previous classes even before that. So spring 2017. Catherine Harkins. Let's see what hers looks like. So, can you all see that? It's looking a little dark up there, isn't it? Hers actually came out pretty good, though. You'll see. Turn the brightness a little bit on that. That's maybe a little too much. So you can see a little bit better. So you'll see that, like, as we had talked about, some of you may want a different type of bridge than the bridge I gave you. Feel free to experiment and do some more modeling, right? You'll also see that she went sort of out a little bit and did some more texturing to get some brick on there, to get that road texture on there. I think she really enjoys modeling, but she's currently in one of my animation classes. I think she really enjoys animation too. So a lot of this is figuring out what it is you're enjoying in this. I'll show you some really impressive examples. So you probably shouldn't expect that yours is going to be like this quality on the first try through, right? Lisa is she's been doing this for a little while. She was very excited about it. And I know that she put a lot of hours into this, right? So this is not the bare minimum. This is an exceptional example of this project, right? I want you all to define the bare minimum for me.
I like the fuzzy screen in the window.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So this is like yeah. There's a lot of. So couple other examples. Ethan Elkins, he always does a great job. No, that's not the bare minimum. So there is no bare minimum, right? The way I grade this project is I sort of divide it up into 5 categories. Each of those 5 categories gets 20 points. That's going to add up to 100, right? And my category, I can't remember them all right off the top of my head, but I know there's modeling, lighting and rendering, animation, overall presentation. I'll have to actually look at the grading scale. So, and so I can actually put that percentage up there if that's helpful. But basically what I do is I look at all of the stuff we've done in class. I guess rigging may have been the other. No, it wasn't rigging. Anyway, that one may be the one that I was doing 25 points per category, but I'll probably end up dividing it up into 5. So basically, it's going to be a few points for each of the things that we've looked at, right? So a little bit for animation, a little bit for lighting and rendering, a little bit for modeling, a little bit for getting the whole thing pulled together into something that looks nice. And I will say, I mean, I know y'all were joking about the bare minimum, but that I hope you all were joking about the bare minimum, because like yeah, that's cool. If this is not the thing you're excited about, that's fine, and like I understand. Recognize that whatever it is you're excited about, the bare minimum will never get you hired, right? Like you this is a very competitive industry, so like don't worry about like my expectations of it. Worry about like pushing yourself, like aim at like. Think of what it is you think you're capable of, and then go 5 or 6 steps past that and aim for that, right? Because if you always do the thing that's safe, you're not going to learn anything from that, right? So take some challenges. If there's something you're like, I don't know how to do that, hear that inside of your head as a challenge to yourself of, I'm going to figure out how to do that, right? There's a quote that is always attributed to different people. I know Pat Summitt said it several times, which is take your weakness and make it your strength. And if you just do that over and over again, you're going to rock at everything. And that's kind of the way I would target this. So whatever it is that's going to make you excited about this project, aim for that, right? Any questions, comments on sort of what's required? what we're aiming at. Yes.
Is there a time restriction for the animation?
Yeah, I think it was. I think I had it listed as 10 to 12 seconds as the range. So that's going to be 240 to about 300 frames, something like that. I actually wouldn't. I would probably say it's all right if you're a little short on that. That is some.
All right if it's a little over?
It's a little over. Depends on what you're kind of going for, right? I usually do put a slight time restriction. I'm not super strict about it, but that's because sometimes people come into this and they're like, "Oh, for that project, I'm going to do a 5-minute animation." And when you get into that, like your render times are through the roof, and I would rather see a shorter piece that's really polished than a longer piece that you barely get done. Does that make sense? So I would say target the shorter piece and make that sort of your stretch goal if it gets longer. But if you have like a very specific story you want to tell, I'm cool with that. Just recognize the more frames you have, the more render time you have too. So, any other questions, comments? Okay. So hopefully you're all excited about this. I'm excited about seeing these every time. It's going to be some challenges. We have over a week of pretty much in-class work time. I'll be here every day. Next class period, I'm not going to bother you too much. I'm going to walk you through sort of the rendering process. And we're going to do like a test render, so you'll see how that works. I'll point you to a video that shows you how the render farm works, so you can try using the render farm if you would like. And then a lot of the rest of the time this semester, or a lot of the rest of the time for this project, I'm just going to kind of get out of your way, let you work, and walk around and answer questions when you have problems. So, and actually, that's what the rest of today is too, which is all of like 5 minutes or something. I don't know how much time we have left in class. Huh?
We're actually done.
We're done?
Yeah.
Oh wow! Talked the whole time. I'm real good at this. Not really. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, we can hang out. Yeah. Yes. Let me check and see what he's got going on in his.
Okay.
Okay, so you said this is a minor file. Yeah. When you go to the file, you can just go
Yeah, I wrote two back again.
this file, and then we'll import these objects into the house. So you can combine them. So we yeah.
Dude, I don't want that money. Hey, those ones don't matter.
Yeah. So what I'll probably do is go into some material from them. You probably want to put some sort of control in there and animate them all together. But really what you need is like, since there's so many pieces, if I drag my 3 pieces underneath that circle, you would just drag all of the first pieces. And then you can animate the circle and all that other stuff.
Cars turn out, bro.
I mean, they're stuck, and I can't go back to their original form.
I was hoping that if I did it,
Oh,
it
they're all
would
in
be
all
faster
of
work.
I combine them.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
You can do that, and you can actually just animate it like it is.
But that's what they basically look like.
They're very cute. They're so much better than mine. Mine look like little like wooden toys.
I don't know how that happened.
And so that's going to let you present the material on this, so I've got a shader.
That hurt me in my soul.
Why?
Yeah, it's kind of
Reminds me of those like pickup trucks
Yeah.
that like the metal.
Hold up. Once he fixes it, like, there they are
Oh,
right
you
there.
see?
So they are. And I'm
And apply the material in, and it's just put the material on.
awful. I'm like, how did I do this? And that one looks like a sliver, and that one is just like a crooked spider. But
That one semi is probably like
So
the
it's still
best
doing
out
it
of
that
all
way,
mine.
but
It's like rectangle and like
Yeah, he makes
box.
a couple of songs that maybe.
I made that the pickup trucks and the smart car. There's like
you should see his motorcycle.
I saw it when he pulled it up and I was
Your talent is rude. I don't like modeling. I'm not looking to go into
Talk about that.
Pixar or Disney. I want to do like
I feel like
Disney stuff.
do what he said, just like people like get really good at it. You're like, this is the plan. And I don't know how to make it into this. Because you're like, and it's like, and then there's something weird getting all that. You're like,
But nope.
Check out the
I
video
have
I
a new
posted last
birthday.
night.
And
The modeling
it's
video I
so
posted
awful.
earlier today too will show you some.
It's so bad. It's $80.
Oh, just turn in that. That's awesome. It's point in there just to show you the news.
Your face is just a pain.
well, one tattoos hurt too.
That would be easier.
It hurts on my hair.
Yeah, just yeah. That's kind of what
I know, it was supposed to be my birthday.
Let me kill this thing so Marty can start using this computer real quick.
He was pulling it like this.
We could schedule